I love learning new things. Make them a little bit dangerous, make them challenging, and I love learning them even more. You name it, I've probably tried it. Skydiving, scuba diving, snowboarding, snow skiing, rappelling, canyoning. And one of the things I learned to do about 9 years ago was whitewater kayaking. And as you can see, it's a very exciting and beautiful sport. And this photo is Lower Potter Falls in Tennessee. On July 4, 2013, I loaded up my truck just like I'd done 100 times before to go kayaking. The only real difference that day is that I was going alone. My boyfriend wanted to do something much more challenging that day, and in July 2013, we'd had a lot of rain, so everything was running. So the boys headed off to a challenging steep creek, and I put a post in a forum and found a girl named Olivia to paddle with on the ecological River in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So we had a great day paddling. At the end of the day, I was loading up my gear. I got in my car like I always do to shoot a text to my boyfriend and let him know that I was done, and I was headed to Chattanooga where we had agreed to meet to watch the fireworks that evening. I didn't have a message from him, which I thought was strange because they had left earlier than I had that day and they had a shorter run to make. But I shot him a text, told him I was loading up and I was heading that way. After I loaded my gear, I got in my truck and I started driving. Within a couple of minutes, my phone rang, and I thought, oh, perfect, we're on the same schedule. As I reached in the seat to grab my phone, my heart immediately sank. The name on the phone was not Scott. The name on the phone was Clay Warren, which at the time was one of Scott's best friends and had been kayaking with him for the day. So I answered the phone and immediately said, what's going on? And Clay's first question to me was, are you driving? Because he knew I'd also been paddling that day and he knew of our plans to meet in Chattanooga. And I was driving. What's going on, Clay? Tell me now. Are you driving? The question was repeated. And if you are, I need you to pull over before I talk to you. So I quickly got myself to the side of the road. I got settled. Clay proceeded to tell me that earlier in the day, Scott had flipped over in a rapid. He had gone missing, and that they had been searching for him for the last 3 hours, but they had not located his body. That search and rescue had called off the search, and they were not going to start until the next morning at daybreak. So as you can imagine, I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, my friend Stacy drove me over to the Big East Fork of the Pigeon, to what's normally a gravel parking lot at the takeout. It had been turned into a command center. There were vehicles everywhere, people everywhere, police cars, emergency vehicles, ambulances. I quickly found the people in charge and began going over the plan for the day with them. It took about 5 minutes for me to realize they weren't going to find Scott because they were not searching in the water. They didn't have any swiftwater rescue people with them that day. They had mostly volunteers, gracious people who'd given up time with their family and friends to come and search for my boyfriend. But I knew they weren't going to find him, so I put a phone call to Clay. This, however, was something Clay had actually already deduced the day before. So Clay had already assembled a team of 11 people that were soon to be headed to the river for us to hike in and find Scott. What turned into a couple-hour trip was actually 5 hours for them because they got stuck on the mountain behind an accident and had to go around. They actually didn't show up until around 2:30 or 3 that afternoon. This turned out to be a good thing because search and rescue was stopping for the day. They had started at daybreak and they were really tired. So this gave us an opportunity to hike in unassisted and sort of unbothered by the search and rescue people. So we assembled ourselves and we began the 2-mile hike into the creek. It's a pretty arduous hike into the creek. And normally, if you're kayaking it, it's with your boat. You're going over trees, you're going under trees, you're going down steep cliffs, you're going over muddy rocks and water, and it was drizzly and rainy that day. As we reached the last place that Scott was seen, we took a moment to reflect on what it was we were there to do. We spent the next 45 minutes, we had 45 minutes to search for Scott, and then we really needed to reassemble because as I just told you, we had to hike in 2 miles. It was late in the day, and we didn't want to get stuck in there after dark. My friend Stacy and I started down the path, and within a few steps, in the corner of my eye, I saw Scott's boat. It's a bright red kayak, it's large. So she and I hiked down the hill to that. It was clear that search and rescue had put the kayak up on the bank. What was interesting at that point was also in that area, it was pretty clear to see that all the river water went to the left. There was a river-wide tree that blocked the channel all the way from the left bank to the middle of the river. And in the middle of the river were 2 car-sized rocks. And in between those car-sized rocks was a big gaping hole. But sticking out of that hole were huge tree branches and debris and all the things that had collected in there from where the water had been high and left them behind. And I just kept thinking to myself that nothing would pass this place, that the tree was there blocking. The water was going over the tree, but it was a big tree, so it must be touching the bottom. And those rocks in the middle, and maybe in that hole. I literally spent the next 45 minutes there, looking at every angle and every position that I could to see if I could find some sign of him. The whistle that was blown to help us know when it was time to recollect sort of brought me back to reality. I remember that we hiked down to the very next rapid, which at this point put us below the tree. So I remember positioning myself so I could look at it from that angle, because it still troubled me. Clay looked at me, and he said, "Are you looking at that tree?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "That tree keeps bothering me too." So we decided at that moment, we had 2 climbers with us, Spider-Men, they should be called, and we had all the gear that we needed to set up appropriate safety and rescue. So that's what we did. We put live bait catch below the tree, we put 2 people above with ropes, and then we sent the 2 guys out on the tree. Within moments, they discovered that Scott was in fact lodged under the tree. He had literally been within 10 feet of where I stood within 5 minutes of hiking in. After getting him out and bringing him to the shore of the creek, I distinctly remember feeling gratitude. Feeling gratitude for the 11 people that had given up their time and their space to come and help me. Feeling gratitude that I was getting this time with him there to say goodbye. Feeling gratitude that he had a black eye and a distinct black mark on his left cheek. Because to me, those marks meant that he was knocked out, that he didn't feel any pain when he experienced what he was going through, that he literally went from the best moment of his life to sleep. I remember those moments, and I remember being so grateful for being able to experience them. Because if search and rescue had found him, I would have found myself behind a yellow ticker tape with no connectivity to what was going on. So I talked to you about this story because in the coming months and years that have followed that event, I've done some research on resilience and why I sort of seem to fare better after going through that tragic experience than other people that went through it with me, and why I seem to fare better and not simply survive it, but I would say sort of thrive after it. I found myself waking up every morning enjoying every single sunrise that I saw. I found myself going to bed every night enjoying every single sunset that I saw. I remember having moments of distinct awareness as to how have I never seen these things before? You know, are they more beautiful now than they used to be? Probably not. I just hadn't been paying attention until I'd experienced that tragic event. It turns out that there were several things about that day and about my life experience that actually led to being pretty resilient. One of those things is sort of my schizophrenia with learning things, right? My putting myself in challenging, fearful situations that sometimes have life-threatening circumstances at the end. Skydiving, for example. It turns out that learning how to properly execute a skydive, pulling my parachute, letting it go, surviving, if I don't do that, I might die, actually trained my mind to deal with systematic processes in stressful situations. It turns out that my swiftwater rescue training, that my wilderness first aid training, actually in fact prepared me for exactly the scenario I experienced that day. So it did not allow my heart and my emotions to overcome my ability to participate and experience that. In addition, it actually empowered me because I felt that I was a contributing factor in part of what needed to be done. So it helped me heal. It turns out another part of resilience when you're experiencing a traumatic event is gratitude. That if you can feel gratitude when you're scared, when you're afraid, and when you're sad, if you can find something to be grateful for, you are more likely to come out not only surviving, but thriving after the experience. So just for a moment, I'd like you all to think about, what are you grateful for? I'd like you to make sure that you try to do this every day. I'd like you to try and remember this talk and remember to do it when you feel the most stressed in your life. Trauma comes in a lot of different formats, and we all have different traumas in our life. In closing today, I want to leave you with a quote. "For a seed to achieve its greatest expression, it must come completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes to someone who doesn't understand growth. It would look like complete destruction." As you leave today, and as you listen to me talk, I'm sure some of you have thought about traumatic events that have already happened to you. And some of you maybe haven't experienced yours yet, but you will. Hopefully, you don't ever experience what I've gone through, but likely you will experience something as traumatic. I encourage you to go home. I encourage you to every single day do something that challenges you. Do something that puts you outside of your comfort zone so that your mind begins to learn how to deal with unusual and unique situations in a systematic and healthy way. I want you to go home and I want you to crack your own shell. Sometimes life is going to crack our shell for us. And if you're sitting in that seat feeling that life has already cracked your shell and not really knowing what to do about it, remember this quote. And remember that it's in fact your time to grow. Thank you.